what is the meaning of life to you, and what have you evaluated through your life about the people you come in contact with? What's the most important part of life to you?
Being there. Somebody needs a hand. Be there. Be there physically, emotionally. Make it a part of your life. Not just to walk away, but be there. Don't wait for somebody to ask you for something to help. Be there and help. I think that personalization is diminished greatly. Ultimately, there's a gazillion people in this world, but it ultimately comes down to one-on-one. I don't think too many people develop that one-on-one relationship. Yeah, we could talk in cosmic terms if you want, but it ultimately comes down what happens between two people. What you could do. Don't need money or anything like that, but just kind gesture. I think that's lost to a large degree. We're all sort of, not physically, but emotionally on an island. And I don't think that's good for the psyche. So that's what I enjoyed years ago. The integration of family and neighbors. That's nowhere the same today. Maybe it's because you're in a place like Brooklyn. I don't know. I really don't know why the transition. But all I can say was much saying at times to me. My name is Lou Earvolino, born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, what was known as the East New York section of Brooklyn. My dad was born in San Giuseppe Ortayan, which was part of Naples, and it doesn't even exist now. They just refer to it as Naples. And as a young boy, he loved school, unlike his son. And at that time, in Italy, you only were entitled to 6th grade free education. After that, you had to pay. And my dad loved school, and he was fortunate that a professore was impressed by my father's dedication to education, told him not worry, because in Italy at that time you only were entitled to free education till the 6th grade, that he would pay for his further education. Well, unfortunately he passed away. Although he wasn't married, he had brothers and sisters, and nothing was in writing. So that was the end of that dream for my dad. And so he struggled. His parents owned a small farm. He did little jobs. So money was always a concern. But there was a neighbor of his whose son had immigrated to the United States. And he would write to his parents, of course in Italian, but his parents couldn't read Italian, so my father would go over there and read the letters. And he was so impressed by what this fellow talked about, his experience in the States. He had a job, he had a nice place to live, that my father started to fall in love with America. So he said to himself, there's got to be a way, I want to get there. And so at the age of 16, he came steerage to the United States. Obviously in those days you had to go through Ellis Island. But in addition to clearing Ellis Island, in those days you had to have a job. And fortunately the fellows whose letters he was reading to his parents had a job, and he went out of his way to secure a position for my father. But also you had to have a sponsor. And while this fellow was over in the States legally, he was not yet a citizen. But his landlady, also Italian, had her citizenship. So she was his sponsor. So after my father came to Ellis Island, was cleared through the process, he was on a train to Buffalo, New York. And there, for the princely sum of $10 a week for 6 days, 10 hours. He was working laying the rail, and he was starting to learn English. But what my father wanted was, more than anything else, to learn how to read and write English. So he changed jobs. And what was interesting, my father never drove a truck on a road, but they would go to Buffalo at night. And so they took them with a truck. And my father would always be there early to sit next to the driver so he'd watch him shift. So all of a sudden he saw a sign that people were looking for drivers. Now here's my father, never was on the road. He used to drive around the base, but never on a road. And so the guy says, "Can you do this?" He said, "Oh, sure." Well, he passed the test. Now the reason he wanted was more money, but now he also had to pay for his food and his boarding, which, with laying the rails, that was supplied by the company. Ultimately, he migrated to Brooklyn, New York. My mom, on the other hand, at the age of 16, 17, was the principal earner in her family. This is the 20s, lots of money around, and she worked in what was called the dreaded workshops. And when I would say a typical salary was maybe $40 a week, my mom was making between 70 and 90, because she was a whiz on the what they call the big machines, which are industrial sewing machines. And they treated her like a prima donna because she also was bilingual. Many of the women there, her co-workers, could only speak Italian. They couldn't even read Italian, but they could at least speak Italian. So my mom would be like a translator because the instructions were written in English. So she was treated quite well by them. So the differential in age was, my dad was 33 and my mom was 20 when they married. My father had his own business and was quite successful. He made, in New York, was referred to soda water. Other places it's tonic or pop. And he had his own business, and especially during World War II, he really flourished. There was the times during the Depression were very difficult, but my dad had that old-fashioned European distrust of banks. So he stored his money in some suitcase tucked away someplace. So when the Depression hit, he had enough money to keep the business surviving. It was tough, but he did. But like I say, World War II, really, because again, people had money. That's the main thing. So he was quite successful in his business. My parents had 4 children. I'm the youngest. Unfortunately, the other 3 have passed away. My adventure was, school was, to me as a young kid, a necessary evil. Somewhere along the line, the light went off, and I ended up going to RPI, which is the oldest engineering school in the United States, located in Troy, New York. There I got my bachelor's in metallurgical engineering. And from there, my first job was at Electric Boat, which made atomic submarines. It was the age of the nuclear sub. So that was interesting to be at something in its infancy. Then it got interesting. I liked the Electric Boat very much, but I had a good friend when I was in college. He went to work at Grumman Aircraft on Long Island. Both of us were from New York. He stayed local, so to speak, and I ended up in Connecticut. And he told me that, hey, Grumman's looking for a welding engineer. And my mom's health wasn't at the best, so I moved to New York. There I met the gal who became my wife, and it was interesting. Got to work with lasers, which was very new. Retrospectively, it's more important than at the time. Because you're an engineer, you're going to do things and accomplish things, and you're working on it in the nonce. Years later, it becomes more significant. To be first at something, it's not like discovering the atom or something like that. But the fact that you were first in something is interesting. I got involved with lasers, and I'm going back 56 years ago, and I was the lead engineer for the first group that used lasers to weld metals. What's interesting is that, and it involves a Nobel Prize. The forerunner to the lasers was masers, which travel at partial wavelengths instead of full wavelengths of light. And a fellow at Columbia University, a professor, was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics, which had to be rescinded because it turned out he wasn't the fellow who discovered the maser. It was one of his grad students, and it was reported in Time magazine. It was noted, it was called the case of the Bronx candy store, because this grad student who was doing the work in a lab kept his lab book up to date, and for whatever reason, which is even these years later, I'm not sure why, he lived in the Bronx, and there was a candy store, and the owner of the candy store was a notary public, and he took his lab book every time he would finish something of significance and have it notarized. I don't think he knew exactly why he did it, but he did it. And so as a consequence, and this is years later, I don't know if he spoke to a lawyer or somebody said you should speak to a lawyer, and he went there, and he was actually the one. While he didn't get the Nobel Prize, the other fellow had it withdrawn. So it was interesting. So working with lasers was fun, and you move on from there, but I spent years working with lasers, for a while, lasers was a solution looking for a problem. And so it was fun to be there and watch it evolve. Now lasers, ironically, just a few weeks ago, I had laser surgery for glaucoma. So imagine you go in full circle in a manner of speaking. Well, I think people felt there were horizons where lasers would be applicable. But to look at it today, to the degree, it's almost commonplace now. You know, here you are in a laboratory environment, and now it's commonplace in a manner of speaking. It's used in so many things today. It's almost like having a telephone. So watch that evolvement to that degree. When you take the time to put it in perspective of going back 56 years, it's interesting to watch that transition, the maturation of a product. So yeah, I enjoy looking back and seeing where it was and where we are today. So it was enjoyable. I liked it, but the problem was that Grumman was working on a contract. They didn't have a vested interest in lasers. And since I felt this was a new field that'd be exciting, I then subsequently moved, and I went to Massachusetts, where I spent over 30 years. Unfortunately, the marriage ended in the divorce, but I have 4 wonderful children and 9 grandchildren. And my problem is distance. I don't get to see them as much as I like. The two closest are in Illinois, of my siblings, of my children, excuse me, and the other two are in Arizona and California. But we do stay in contact via letters, phone calls, but it's not the same as seeing them face to face. So that's one of my regrets. Now at an older age, living in Pennsylvania, fortunately I have family here. My nephew's son and his wife and child I'm very close with. They're very considerate. They'll always ask me to come over, see how I'm doing. And that's, at the age of 82, that's quite rewarding. What is the past? Obviously, there are things you would rather not have. But in large, there was that sort of community that doesn't seem to exist anymore. Family, friends, it just seems like it's much more disjointed today. And that's what I regret. But the memories serve me well. Faith, family, country. Those are the three principles I think people should live by. Or at least I should live by. I can't speak for other people. I think sometimes things are transitory. I guess I'm more for things that are permanent. And that's why I believe faith, family, country are permanent. So if I have to look back and watching the transitions, it's disconcerting to me today. It just does. It seems like it's much more fractured and not well integrated like it was. When I was a child, whatever my parents said to me was reinforced by my friends' parents. We used to kid around and say that before you got married, you had to read this book. And every people who got married had to read this book. Because what I heard from my parents was repeated by my friends' parents. There was that constancy and consistency that's gone by the boards today. It was, people like to almost today diminish tradition. I don't understand that. Was everything right in the past? Of course not. But as I say, I think how people led their lives and how their families were so central. And I was very fortunate as a child to have aunts and uncles in the same neighborhood. And that sense of community doesn't exist anymore. Friends, my friend's family, how everybody sort of integrated. It seems now, I know things change. Most times now, a husband and a wife are working. That's a big difference. I'm not trying to put a value judgment which is better, which is worse. It's just that it made it a lot easier when mothers were home. That continuity of a neighborhood was maintained. So I'm not going to be critical. Time passes on. But as I judge it, it was much better. And people say it was more simple. Yeah, it was more simple. I agree. Things got more complex. But you got to have a solid foundation. And I think that's what's lacking today. That foundation of family, divorce, all these things. I didn't know anybody who was divorced when I was a kid. If I look back, I don't remember anybody who was divorced. Dissolution of a marriage. I think sometimes it's just immature people. People don't understand the value of family anymore. That's what I regret. I would say to them, don't get caught up in the malaise of currency. Don't think of things as being stages. There are stages. Obviously, 20, 30, 40, you're going through different stages in your life. But there's got to be permanence. Respect other people. Go out of your way. Be helpful. Don't be on the sidelines. You know somebody needs a hand, be there. I don't see that today.